LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the December 13th edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me. I'll be using the 14 best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for which would be a really informative, educational, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all today. My main topic, as you can see from the title of the video, is multiple topics: tornadoes, Delta, and Omicron while democracy dies. And that's like three different topics in there. And then I'll also be covering a fourth topic, the new CBO scoring of the Build Back Better bill. And I'll have Lindsey Graham, Republican Senator, versus Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar on two different programs debating that, including Lindsey Graham being cross-examined by Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday for the last time, because Chris Wallace signed off forever from Fox News Sunday. He's going to CNN Plus, a new streaming service, and I'll show that clip at the very end, the Fox News Sunday sign-off from Chris Wallace. And I'll cover the tornadoes, like I said. That was a main focus of the news programs. You'll see when I get to the news summaries, most of them focused on these tornadoes that devastated Kentucky and like 5 other states over the weekend, and the new Omicron variant, the old Delta variant, and then some ongoing news about Donald Trump and his attempt to subvert our democracy back on January 6th. New stuff has been coming out, like a coup PowerPoint, and just even since the news, the new Sunday news shows, there's been a revelation that Mark Meadows supposedly told the National Guard only to protect the pro-Trump people on January 6th. So this scandal is continuing, and I'll talk about that some more. But the big story is probably the continuing COVID pandemic, and that was sort of the new possible Omicron variant. You remember 2 weeks ago, that was the main topic of the news programs, and they said we'd know more about it in 2 weeks, and so I'm going to do some follow-up on that. But it was also the topic of the Saturday Night Live cold open on Saturday, and that's what I'm going to use for my political comedy. It was Kate McKinnon as Dr. Anthony Fauci, talking about making a few jokes at the beginning, and then having various... First there was the CDC players, which I cut out, and then various public figures like Andrew and Chris Cuomo and Ted Cruz, of course, all played by the comedians, the sketch players on Saturday Night Live. But I picked out Cecily Strong playing Marjorie Taylor Greene, which I thought was particularly appropriate for my live stream, because she has this COVID conspiracy theory that I see a lot in the live comments during my live stream, these weird COVID conspiracy theories, and a lot of them kind of sound like what you hear from Marjorie Taylor Greene in the end of this too. By the way, the entire cold open is on the Saturday Night Live YouTube channel, and a link I put down under sources. Pretty much all of the Saturday Night Live is cut up into segments on that channel, and this is about 2 minutes of a much longer cold open that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Hi, everyone. It's me, Dr. Fauci. Do people still think I'm sexy, or are we done with that? When people see me on TV, they think, oh, this can't be good. And their children think, wow, that elf on the shelf got old. Anyway. As you probably heard, there is an Omicron wave sweeping the globe. Some experts feared the Omicron variant would be vaccine resistant, kind of like, I don't know, 40% of Americans. More recent data suggests that if you had a vaccine and a booster, you should be pretty well protected. So if that's you, I'd like to officially say, unclench. With COVID cases on the rise, people still have a lot of questions. Is it safe to travel? Can I still use this as an excuse to get out of stuff? I would like to never work again. So to help answer these queries, I once again invited members of the CDC to act out various holiday scenelets. So, now, unfortunately, those were not the last public figures you'll see tonight, because when it comes to acting deeply offended about something minor, some of our most gifted performers these days come not from Hollywood, but from Congress, including the ladies in this next scene, Christmas Truths.
Hi, I'm Lauren Boebert, and she's Marjorie Taylor Greene.
It's pronounced gun. The government has been using this fake disease to strip us of our freedom. Do they think we're dumb?
Please, would they give a dumb person a gun? Yes.
First, they said the shutdowns were until they found a vaccine. Then they found a vaccine and said it worked. Then they said everyone should get it. Then people got it and it saved their lives. If that's not communism, then honey, I might not know what communism is.
Yeah, that was my favorite line. If that's not communism, honey, I don't know what communism is. I think I might be, there's a big rainstorm going on here. I hope I don't have a power outage. For a second I thought the power flickered, but so if all of a sudden the screen goes dark, that's probably what happened. But I just wanted to show you that cold open and the crazy conspiracy theories and some of that actually does sound, like first they told us that the science said one thing, then they got more data, and then they told us the science said something different. That actually is science. I don't know what the deal is with that, but why that's like a conspiracy theory. But also the intellectual level of the crazies in the Republican Party in Congress has reached new lows this term, I think, with Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert being parodied there. And anyway, I thought that sometimes I say that Saturday Night Live lets us know what the possible, maybe more low information voters and participants in our democracy are thinking or seeing. What is the simplified caricature of our political process. And I'm happy to see Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert getting simplified in that manner as crazy and dumb. I don't know. You can let me know what you think in the comment section. And so now I want to get to the news summaries. Oh, thank you, Matthew, for that super chat contribution. I always appreciate the support of my live viewers, especially financial support like that super chat contribution. If you want to support my videos financially, there's a link right below the video, both to my Patreon account where you can become a monthly patron, or direct PayPal contributions. And I appreciate the people who click that little $sign and give me a super chat contribution during the show. It definitely peps me up. I don't know. You can tell me what you think about that. But like I said before, I was distracted by that nice gesture by Matthew. I'm going to show you the news summaries. And like I said, they mostly focus on these tornadoes in Kentucky and surrounding states. And, in terms of doing a media criticism of that focus, I understand there was this huge tornado, and you'll hear from the news summaries that tornadoes usually stay on the ground for 1 or 2 miles, and this one stayed on the ground for over 200 miles. They are saying that there's going to be more deaths than so far have, now a day or so later, have been verified. I think right now the death count is around 65, but there's still dozens of people missing. But the reason that I'm wondering about the focus on this, and I talked about this when they focused all Sunday on that building that collapsed in Miami. Compare the death, maybe assume the death toll from this tornado is 300. On that same day, the COVID death count, I believe, was between 12 and 1,300 in the United States. And the thing is, when, COVID is sort of it's like a neutron bomb. It just kills the people and it leaves the buildings, unlike the the tornadoes, which like rip through and they create these pictures, and I mean, they're, you know, scary coming from the sky, and you know, I understand when a whole town is destroyed that's a news story, but is it more of a news story than the 12 or 1,300 people that died that day from COVID in the United States? And I'll show a little bit of a coverage of that, but not that much, not at the beginning. And then the other question I had about the coverage of the tornadoes is, with this extreme, like record-breaking weather event, it raises questions about climate change, because climate change leads to a lot of extreme weather events. And I was curious as to which of the programs would explore that, and I'm basically going to show you all the mentions of climate change in all 5 of the programs. Meet the Press and Fox News Sunday. You know, you expect it from Fox News Sunday. I'm not sure why Meet the Press never mentioned climate change. And then I'm going to show you ABC and CBS first, that both did a pretty good job with climate change. And then CNN didn't mention it right at the beginning, but they mentioned it talking to the FEMA administrator, and I'll have that clip. So, but anyway, that's my pre-criticism of the news summaries. I'm going to start with the longest and best one, I think. And these are all kind of longer than usual, most of them, because they have the anchor, and then they have someone on the ground I think they're all in Mayfield, Kentucky. But anyway, there's someone on the ground looking at the devastation, and then they have like a meteorologist, climate change expert, or what, depending on which of the shows. And like I said, I think ABC does the best job. Well, ABC and CBS both do a good job of at least addressing the climate change issue. And I'll start with the ABC News Summary from George Stephanopoulos, and then he's joined by Linsey Davis on the ground, and then Rob Marciano talking about meteorology over in this clip.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. As we come on the air this morning, communities across the South and Midwest are digging out from a swarm of deadly tornadoes. More than 40 reported across 6 states, leaving scores dead, some areas completely flattened. Kentucky's Governor Andy Beshear called it the most deadly tornado event in the history of the state. President Biden approved an emergency declaration promising the federal government will do everything possible to help with rescue and recovery. Those efforts continuing around the clock, and our team is on the ground across the region. The hardest hit site, a candle factory in Mayfield, Kentucky, where dozens were killed, 40 people still missing. And we begin in Mayfield with ABC News Live anchor Linsey Davis. Good morning, Linsey.
Hey, good morning to you, George. You know, I'm seeing it firsthand, and still I'm having a difficult time really getting my mind around the magnitude of the devastation here in Mayfield, Kentucky. Since it is Sunday morning, it feels appropriate to start with church. After all, this is a community that is in need of and asking for prayer. Take a look from our drone. All this rubble here less than 48 hours ago, there was a church right behind me. In this 2-block area alone, 3 churches have been destroyed, perhaps just when they are needed most. A prayer service is planned to take place here this morning in the midst of the rubble. We had a look inside the First Christian Church of Mayfield. Last Sunday, they welcomed worshipers. This morning, it is decimated. Everywhere you look, there is this evidence of splintered houses and splintered lives, heaps of what once was, remnants of what used to be. One of the tornadoes stayed on the ground for 227 miles, the winds reaching 155 miles per hour, which is faster than most passenger trains. You've heard the headlines, at least 70 dead, that this is Kentucky's most devastating, most deadly tornado in the state's history, but the scenes and the stories here on the ground, that's what really puts things in perspective. Just think about what has preoccupied your own thoughts in the past 24 hours. And then think about people like Angie, a woman here in Kentucky who describes both her and her mother being picked up and sucked out of their house. Her mom went to the hospital. Their house is destroyed. They have lost everything. Just one story of so many. An estimated 60,000 customers are now without power here in Kentucky. But in some ways, they're the fortunate ones. They still have a household. Power can, of course, be restored. Some of the places of worship here that are able to remain open have moved service till 3 o'clock in order to allow members to use the morning daylight to begin this long road ahead of recovery. George.
Linsey, you said it's so hard to wrap your mind around it. We heard the same thing from the governor. We heard the same thing from President Biden yesterday. This recovery effort could take weeks, months.
For sure. I mean, the places that are still standing, the schools, the hotels, the churches, many of them are working as shelters at this point. Many of them also have staging areas where they're asking people to bring whatever they can, whether that's water, whether that's diapers, whether that's a pack and play, because, you know, quite often people talk about picking up the pieces, George. You know, in this case, for so many people, they're starting from scratch. They just lost it all.
Linsey Davis, thank you. And of course, it's not just Kentucky. As we said, 6 states hit by this swarm of tornadoes. I want to go to Rob Marciano, our senior meteorologist, who's at the Amazon warehouse that was destroyed in Edwardsville, Illinois. Such a wide path of destruction, Rob.
Yeah, George, 9 confirmed tornadoes so far, but several more reported. We still have to have storm survey teams go out and analyze the situation, especially the one that went through Mayfield, that one potentially going on the ground for across 4 states for over 200 miles. This one here in Edwardsville was an EF3 tornado with 155-mile-per-hour winds cutting through this Amazon facility. This is a new facility. You can see behind me exactly what it looks like now. This is a hole about a football field wide, 3 to 4 stories tall. Some pretty stunning before and after photographs. There were 6 fatalities here. Over 40 employees scrambling for safety when the tornado warnings went off. But when you see what happened to this building, which is less than 5 years old, with concrete walls 11 inches thick, what these winds did to it, there probably was no place to hide. Same for the nursing home in Arkansas and also all the buildings across parts of Kentucky. Safety will be a question asked today, George, not for this facility, but across the one in Mayfield. But in some cases, when the buildings are just completely flattened, there's just nowhere to hide, George.
Rob, and it's so unusual to see tornadoes like this in December.
It is. And matter of fact, EF3 tornadoes in Kentucky, that's never happened to have 3 of them. We've had EF2 tornadoes in December. So this likely is going to go down as an unprecedented event as far as the strength of these storms are concerned. We had record-breaking heat added in advance of it, and that certainly fueled these very spring-like storms. So an unusual event, very rare indeed, George.
And we expect more inclement weather across the region this week?
We're going to see a seesaw in temperatures, that's for sure. You know, the problem with having tornadoes come through in cold winter months is that hundreds of thousands of people are without power, potentially without heat. Temperatures this morning below freezing. They'll be below freezing again tomorrow morning. So not just the recovery, but the survival for those who still have a home to go back to just for shelter may not have heat. So it's a tough go for a lot of people, George.
And Rob, finally, President Biden talked about the connection to climate change yesterday. Explain more about that.
You know, climate change, we know for sure it impacts floods, it impacts wildfires, certainly droughts and heat waves, and in some cases hurricanes, but we're just not sure about severe weather and tornadoes. But what we are seeing is that having this happen in the month of December this far north, that is unprecedented. So maybe not affecting the strength of tornadoes, but where and when they happen, that seems to be direct link towards climate change, George.
Rob Marciano, thanks very much. Let's bring in Deanne Criswell now, the FEMA administrator for the federal government.
And I will have a clip of the FEMA administrator, Deanna Criswell, talking about climate change with Jake Tapper coming up. But because Jake Tapper didn't mention climate change in his introductory news summary, the 3 that did, but he did mention it later. As I said, Meet the Press, Fox News Sunday did not mention climate change anywhere in the program. ABC there had a little bit of discussion, and I mean a brief synopsis of what you need to know, that there isn't a proven connection between climate change and an increase in the number of tornadoes, but maybe the timing and location of this has to do with changing climate. But it's actually, and before I showed the clip, I wasn't sure whether it was ABC or CBS that had the best discussion of the climate change issue regarding tornadoes. And having watched the ABC one, I now remember for sure it is the CBS one. This is kind of similar. It's a little bit shorter. It's Margaret Brennan doing an introduction. And then they have David Begnaud, who is on the ground, I believe also in Mayfield, Kentucky. I saw people talking about the Bowling Green massacre. I even made a video about the Bowling Green massacre and how that was bogus a long time ago. That there was like this claim of there being a terrorist attack in Bowling Green, Kentucky, which never occurred. But now, actually, because of the tornadoes, there were people killed in Bowling Greens. And that's something I mentioned. That's something I said to my wife when that news came up. I said, "Oh, actual Bowling Green massacre," and I see other people are saying that as well. But sorry to get distracted there. Oh, and as long as I'm getting distracted with the live viewers, I should thank is that KTIF, the second super chat contribution. Hope it keeps me peppy while I'm trying to be peppy. You can let me know if I have sufficient pep. But like I said before, I got distracted by the live comments there. CBS has the best of the news summaries when it comes to climate change after Margaret Brennan and then David Begnaud on the ground in Kentucky. Then they have this guy, Jeff Berardelli, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. And he is like their meteorologist and climate change expert. He's the one you'll see when Margaret Brennan introduces him. And he gives a lot more information, says that these tornadoes may be more the result of La Nina rather than climate change, because that's, well, I'll let you watch it. And like I said, I think this is the best of the news summaries, even though it's not quite as long as the ABC one. I think it gives you more useful information, which I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. We begin today with the aftermath of Friday's trail of tornadoes that barreled through 6 states, including Arkansas, Missouri, Mississippi, Tennessee, Illinois, and Kentucky. CBS News has confirmed 25 deaths at this point, and that number will go higher, especially in Kentucky. Our David Begnaud reports from the devastated town of Mayfield.
Good morning, Margaret. As the mural behind me reads, welcome to Mayfield, more than a memory. Memories are all that some people here have left, because as Kentucky's governor said, I've got some towns that are gone.
Devastating death and destruction this weekend as more than 30 tornadoes ripped through 6 states from Arkansas all the way up to Illinois. Hardest hit appears to be Kentucky, where the governor says one long-track tornado ran 227 miles from Arkansas right into his state.
This event is the worst, most devastating, most deadly tornado event in Kentucky's history.
The tornado that hit the city of Mayfield, Kentucky, sent debris 6 miles into the air. It could be one of the most intense and longest tornadoes ever recorded. Entire blocks are nothing but rubble now.
I can't believe that our town is gone now.
Barbara Tate was inside the now flattened candle factory here in Mayfield. She was one of more than 100 people inside the factory working on holiday orders.
People hollering for help me, help me. And you crying and want to help them, but you can't help them because you're trying to help yourself.
So far, about 40 people have made it out safe. But the governor said it's going to be a miracle if they find anybody else alive. In Arkansas, a nursing home saw its roof ripped right off, beds thrown into the parking lot. One resident died, everyone else was safely evacuated. The state's governor toured the area Saturday.
What struck me the most is that there was not more that lost their life.
The governor of Tennessee credited evacuations for limiting the state's death toll to 4. In Edwardsville, Illinois, the roof of an Amazon warehouse collapsed with the workers still inside. At least 6 people were killed. Rescue workers worked from sunup to sundown, desperately looking for any signs of life. It's still unclear how many people are missing.
There are no words to assuage the pain of losing a loved one.
That is a pain Kentucky's governor says he almost felt himself.
It's really hard and really painful. I spent 8 hours wondering if one of my cousins was still alive.
Just driving here this morning, we noticed that in farm fields with nothing else around, no buildings for miles, there are trucks and dumpsters and pieces of homes. So you realize that these were whipped into the air like toys and tossed all over the state of Kentucky. Margaret.
David Begnaud, thank you. We go now to CBS News meteorologist and climate specialist Jeff Berardelli, who joins us from New York. Jeff, these tornadoes appear to be historic in strength and devastation. What can you tell us?
Well, it's extraordinarily rare for December. December is usually our most quiet month, but look at this map right here. So let's talk about the factors that led to this. Now, as in any tornado outbreak, you have a huge contrast between cold to the north and warm to the south. What was unusual is just how warm it was. Memphis hit a record high of 80 degrees, and that's why we think that climate change is beginning to factor in. But I think the bigger factor is La Nina, and I'll tell you why. La Nina is present right now, and the latest research shows that we see an increase in tornado activity right there where we had the tornado outbreak on Friday night in the mid-Mississippi Valley area. So that's the overriding factor. So climate change, let's talk about that. I should first say that there's no trend in tornado numbers due to climate change. However, it may be making the environment more favorable, especially on outbreak days, because you add more warmth, more energy. It's like storms on steroids, and more moisture. That's a more favorable environment for supercell thunderstorms and tornadoes. I think the biggest shift we're seeing because of climate change, the latest research shows a shift in the actual location of the increase in tornadoes across the Mississippi Valley into the Mid-South area. That is a more densely populated area, and they tend to happen at night, which makes these tornadoes more dangerous. Margaret?
Important context. Thank you, Jeff. And we go now to the governor of Kentucky, Andy Beshear. Good morning to you, Governor.
And Governor Beshear, I saw the live commenters. I saw someone was asking if the governor of Kentucky. Oh, it was Tom Trask in Kentucky. That's Beshear. Isn't he a Democrat? Yes. Governor Andy Beshear was on 3 or 4. He didn't do the full Ginsburg, which for those of you who watched the reenactment of the Monica Lewinsky saga and the American Crime Story impeachment, you saw who Daniel Ginsburg was, the guy who did the full Ginsburg the first time, going on all 5 of the Sunday shows, and that's why they call it the full Ginsburg. So Andy Beshear did. He gave some of the same talking points. I didn't take any clips of him. I thought about it. There was one thing he said, like on every show, like, we want to go door to door, but a lot of people don't have their doors left. It seemed like sort of a weird joke. I mean, it wasn't really a joke, but and he like teared up multiple times on multiple shows. So I don't know if he's benefiting politically from his leadership. That sometimes happens in these disasters, but. I don't know. I thought he did a good job on the shows, but I didn't take any clips of him. But I did think, like I said before, I showed the CBS News summary that their meteorologist / climate expert, Jeff Berardelli, I think is how they pronounce his last name. He gave like the best, most detailed explanation of the connection or lack of connection between climate change and tornadoes, which no connection to the higher number of tornadoes, maybe making them stronger, maybe moving their location and making them come at night. I'm not sure. Like, that was kind of weird. I'd like more information, like how it changes the time of day. But anyway, I'm now going to go to, I guess, the worst of the news summaries, because it includes this Republican Party propaganda, this, Chris Wallace, this is Fox News, Sunday's news summary, and they have 3 people. They have Steve Harrigan on the ground in Kentucky after Chris Wallace does the introduction, and then they have David Spunt reporting on this major spike in crime, which they do like all day, every day on Fox News, and I mean, there is some increase in, some cities that have been growing have also had, like, I think there are 9, 10, 11, 12 cities. Like Austin, Texas has grown a lot, so it has a larger population is one of the reasons that it has more murders, but also violence has gone up post-COVID, and there are a lot of, you'll see from the news summary, Chris Wallace at least says there are 2 different explanations. Democrats have their explanation, and Republicans, of course, blame soft on crime Democrats and progressive prosecutors, and that's what I hear all day, every day. Every hour at least, they have some story about George Gascon or Chesa Bowden in San Francisco or what's his name, Larry Krasner in Philadelphia. They hate those guys so much, and they're trying to like smear them and blame them for a rise in crime that's happening all over the country, where there are progressive prosecutors and non-progressive prosecutors, which is and started before Biden came in. Like the murder rate went up at the end of the Trump administration, and probably had something to do with COVID and like the weird distortion in our society. And I mean, sometimes you can't even tell why. But you can let me know what you think, why there's been this spike in crime that has been so overhyped on Fox News and makes this first Chris Wallace and then Steve Harrigan report on the tornadoes. And I guess that's news, but then they have this whole right-wing Republican talking point on the crime spike that I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch that news summary together over here.
From Fox News in Washington. We begin with breaking news. Emergency crews are searching for survivors and digging through the destruction after a trail of deadly tornadoes hit 6 states. The largest and most devastating, tearing across more than 200 miles, with Kentucky bearing the brunt. The governor there is saying at least 70 are dead, but that number could grow to more than 100. Let's bring in Steve Harrigan live on the ground in Mayfield, Kentucky, with the latest. Steve.
Chris, ordinarily when you see the aftermath of a tornado, you can see the path. One street gets hit, maybe the next street over does not get hit. That is not the case in this town, where the destruction is almost complete. The candle factory was one of the largest employers here. At midnight Friday, a tornado brought the building down on 110 workers inside, including a trapped woman broadcasting a cry for help.
I'm really scared. I'm trying to be cool, y'all, but I'm really, really scared.
Gone with the houses, the businesses, the trees, the landscape, our fathers, daughters, co-workers, friends.
One of my best friends is inside there right now, I'm assuming. We haven't heard from him since the tornado hit about 8:30 last night.
Unfortunately, her friend was one of 6 killed when the tornado collapsed a wall in an Amazon warehouse in Illinois. When you talk to people here who survived, some of them appear stunned. In just one day, some of them have lost their house, their car, their job, their business, their records, their photographs, everything. Chris?
Steve Harrigan reporting from Kentucky. Steve, thank you. Now to the spike in crime across the country. At least a dozen major cities hitting all-time homicide records already this year. Meanwhile, major retailers are pleading for help as smash and grab robberies are on the rise. The White House says more guns and the continuing pandemic are behind the crime surge. But critics point to changes in cash bail and more lenient prosecutors, calling on the federal government to do more. In a moment, we'll talk with the mayor of the country's biggest city, New York's Bill de Blasio. But first, let's turn to David Spunt at the White House for a look at how the Biden administration is responding. David.
Chris, the White House and Justice Department are pumping millions of dollars into fighting crime, but city leaders on the ground say it's not working fast enough.
This bothers me very much.
Attorney General Merrick Garland sounding the alarm on a nationwide spike in crime, from smash and grabs in California to more than 1,000 murders this year on the streets of Chicago and surrounding areas. America's cities, small and large, are under the microscope and breaking records.
When you have people that have no regard for others and expecting them to change their behavior dramatically, it's not working out.
The White House fending off criticism from the National Sheriff's Association over just how much the Biden administration is helping.
The president and members of our administration have been longtime advocates for supporting and funding the COPS program, something where the president proposed almost $300 million in additional assistance through his budget from what it was last year.
$300 million across every jurisdiction across the country
would equal about $18,000 per jurisdiction. How is that going to help? I don't think so.
On the streets of the Big Apple, it's not only crime grabbing headlines. Mayor Bill de Blasio's new private sector mandate will require everyone 12 and older to show proof of 2 vaccines, ages 5 to 11, proof of at least 1. The mandate, Chris, begins December 27th and affects nearly 200,000 businesses. Chris?
David Spunt reporting from the White House. David, thank you. And joining us now is the mayor of New York City, Bill de Blasio. Mayor, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
And I don't have a clip of that Bill de Blasio interview later. I do have Bill de Blasio debating Republican governor of Arkansas, Asa Hutchinson, about vaccine mandates. And you see how they threw that into David Spunt? It's because David Spunt's report there, that was the Republican Party talking points, as I mention over and over again. If you read this book over here, it's sort of cut in half, but maybe I'll move the Loudest Voice in the Room by Gabriel Sherman. It tells you how Roger Ailes created the Fox News channel to be a propaganda arm of the Republican Party. So even though sometimes journalism incidentally occurs there, and Chris Wallace was sometimes did engage in journalism on the Fox News channel, as I've talked about many times over the years, that is just sort of incidental to the purpose. I guess Steve Harrigan's reporting from Oklahoma there was mostly straight news. I mean, if you really studied it, I'm sure there was some Republican subtext in there, but the David Spunt report was all talking points. It was this whole crime spike, the crime crisis, as they even have little chyrons during the week on Fox News. The crime crisis, Biden's border crisis. I've even shown you some a few months ago. Biden's tax and spending spree is one of them. Police under siege, that's another one. And they just have these ongoing narratives that they're pumping out there because it helps these simplistic Republican ideas on the kind of wedge issues that may help Republicans in the midterms and maybe even beyond. And often they mirror some of the issue, like the immigration issue, especially that Donald Trump championed, if you can call coming down the escalator and saying, they're, murderers, rapists, whatever. They're not sending their best, and I'm sure some of them are fine people. Well, it must be, well, anyway, now I'm going off on a tangent, but my point being that Fox News summary was definitely, especially the last part, biased Republican talking points, and I want to finish up here, or I have 2 more news summaries. The next one's the NBC News Meet the Press news summary, and it focuses on the tornadoes. My big criticism is what I said earlier. Nowhere in the entire Meet the Press program did they even mention climate change, which, when you have an extreme weather event, I think it's sort of like journalistic malpractice not to bring it up, even though from the previous news summaries we know that climate change might not have caused these tornadoes, or might have had some effect, but not the most important factor. But not to bring it up at all, I think, is wrong. Fox News Sunday never brought it up. Meet the Press also never brings it up in the news summary. I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
And a good Sunday morning. We're going to, of course, get to the spike on COVID cases, the battle over mandates, my interview with the Secretary of State about Russia and Ukraine in a moment. But we're going to begin with the terrible tornado damage in Kentucky and some neighboring states. A series of tornadoes, more typical in the spring, very rare in December, erupted overnight on Friday, causing horrific damage and loss of life. All told, these tornadoes touched down in 6 states in the nation's midsection. One tornado alone was said to be on the ground for an estimated record 200+ miles, cutting a shocking path of destruction through several states. Most of that journey was in hardest hit Kentucky. And the worst of the damage occurred in the Kentucky town of Mayfield, where a twister hit and destroyed a candle factory that was being used as shelter by scores of people. Dozens are feared dead there alone.
We did I think the lights went out, and then we did a rock, boom, and everything fell down on us.
I'm looking at the trees and everything is just completely sawed off. There's very little in the way of bark remaining in some of them. Buildings are completely flattened. Cars have been picked up and thrown. You know right away you're dealing with a violent tornado.
At least 6 people were also killed in Edwardsville, Illinois. That's just outside of St. Louis, Missouri, when an Amazon warehouse took a direct hit. The overall death toll is unclear at this point, but Kentucky's Governor Andy Beshear says as many as 100 are feared dead in his state alone. I'm going to talk to Governor Beshear in a moment, but first we're joined by my colleague Kate Snow. She is reporting on the ground from the hardest hit area there of Mayfield. Kate, the pictures are devastating. I imagine being there in person is even more impressionable.
Yeah, Chuck, it's almost indescribable. I can't even put in words how devastated this city is. I have to tell you, I've covered probably more than a dozen tornadoes over my career. And Chuck, I have never seen a town, a city flattened like this, just block after block. You talked about the candle factory. I want to tell you about that. 110 people were working there over on the late shift on Friday night. It's a 24-hour operation, and this time of year, there are a lot of orders for candles, so they were all inside that warehouse. Right now, there are still dozens of people missing. I just talked to a state trooper who told me they're out there again today trying to recover people and reunite families, hopefully, but they are fairly sure the death toll there at the candle factory will rise. At the same time, we're starting to hear signs, even this morning already, of cleanup happening. I'm hearing, the beeps of heavy equipment being brought in to start clearing things. The mayor told me that it's only a matter of time, months, maybe years, they will be able to rebuild. This is a resilient community. It's a very tight-knit town, a city of about 10,000 people. They all know each other. They're helping each other on this Sunday morning. And I also want to point out, this is Mayfield, but Chuck, this scene is repeated all across the state of Kentucky, in smaller ways perhaps, but equally devastated. We're talking about places over like Bowling Green. Overnight, we learned there are even more deaths there, and it is a Sunday. A lot of church services happening, even though churches here were destroyed, Chuck. They're going to get together here, even if they just have an altar standing. We've heard of one church where literally it's no walls, but just an altar, and they're having services and asking for prayers this morning, Chuck.
Well, Kate Snow on the ground for us in Mayfield. I know you're going to have a lot more on the nightly news this evening. Thank you, Kate. Joining me now is Governor Beshear.
So there you go. Like I said, didn't ever mention climate change. Oh, thank you, Lulu Girl, for that peppy super chat contribution. I appreciate that. And anyway, the other criticism that I should also add to what I said about not mentioning climate change is, like all the coverage of these tornadoes, you did hear Chuck Todd mention briefly at the beginning that their ongoing COVID epidemic would be covered later, and they did cover it later in the show, but I don't think they put the focus on the 12 or 1,300 people who died from COVID that day. That you saw one. I think there was an estimate of 25 and then 75 on one of those news summaries. Last I heard, it was only 65 confirmed deaths, but there were dozens still missing. But anyway, I've made those criticisms before, and now I want to finish up the news summaries with the briefest one. CNN State of the Union, Jake Tapper starting off the show with the first 40 seconds. So I guess you can't really fault him for not mentioning climate change in 40 seconds, but they talk about the tornadoes, etc. over here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the state of our union is holding out hope for the missing. Emergency crews in the Midwest are continuing the desperate search and rescue effort through tons of wreckage, flattened homes and factories and cars that were simply tossed around after at least 30 tornadoes touched down across 6 states this weekend: Kentucky, Arkansas, Missouri, Mississippi, Illinois, and Tennessee. Dozens of people are feared dead, and officials warn the number will almost certainly rise as rescuers continue to sift through the devastation. Joining me now from the Commonwealth hardest hit, Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear. Governor Beshear, thank you.
Yeah, like I said, I don't have an Andy Bashir clip. I kind of talked about him already. I should mention I actually lived in St. Louis for about 5 years. That's where I finished law school and started work as a public defender. And I had some friends across the river in Illinois, in Alton, who I would go and visit fairly frequently. And so that's right near Edwardsville. I know I'm kind of familiar with that area, and that's a sad, and there were, and also St. Charles, which is just to the west of St. Louis. I did some conflict cases in St. Charles County, Missouri, and one of my friends who I haven't talked to in a long time, I think lives there. One of my old friends from when I went to law school. But anyway, I was never there during a tornado. I actually, as an undergraduate, I was near a tornado in New Haven, Connecticut, which you wouldn't think it is a place where there were tornadoes, but sometimes there are, I guess. And I remember this loud, and all this debris hitting the side of the house, and it was really scary. And I think that was only an F1, so I can imagine that all that stuff you just saw covered was pretty scary, and certainly creates a huge impression, which I believe is what Chuck Todd meant to say in that news summary before last. It's really impressionable, he said, but I forgot to mention he made that mistake, but can't forget to point out one of Chuck Todd's mistakes, right? But anyway, those are the news summaries. Like I said, I think the CBS News did the best job, and Fox News did the worst job, and I don't know, you can rank them 1 to 5 and let me know what you think if you want. I did criticize CNN State of the Union for not mentioning climate change in the beginning news summary, but it was only 40 seconds. They only mentioned it really briefly in Jake Tapper's questioning of the FEMA administrator, and I will show that clip, another really quick clip, and just to finish up the whole tornado climate change discussion over here.
And scientists warn that extreme weather events such as this one will only happen more frequently as the climate continues to warm. Is your agency, is FEMA, equipped to handle this new normal?
This is going to be our new normal, and the effects that we're seeing from climate change are the crisis of our generation. We're taking a lot of efforts at FEMA to work with communities to help reduce the impacts that we're seeing from these severe weather events, and help to develop system-wide projects that can help protect communities. And so we'll continue to work on helping to reduce the impacts, but we're also prepared to respond to any community that gets impacted by one of these severe events.
All right, Administrator Criswell, thanks so much and appreciate the work you do.
So yeah, that is the clip of the FEMA Administrator, Deanne Criswell, that I promised earlier, and that was the one mention of climate change. And I guess the criticism would be that Jake Tapper kind of linked the tornadoes to climate change, and from the previous news summaries I showed, we know that that link is not all that concrete. I mean, well, I'm not going to go into it again, but you know that there are it may increase some of the the warmth may increase the strength and move the location. And before I saw people in the live comments didn't understand what I meant about. I understand why it's more dangerous when the tornadoes come at night. What I don't understand is how changing weather patterns change the time of day that the tornadoes come. That doesn't make sense to me. But I mean, I'm sure the meteorologist expert guy knows what he's talking about. Well, I'm pretty sure he knows what he's talking about. I was just wondering for get more details why changing weather patterns would change the time of day that tornadoes come. But anyway, I'm going to move on to a few clips I have here on Delta and Omicron variants and the ongoing pandemic. By the way, CBS News' Face the Nation did a whole news summary from Mark Strassman on the ongoing pandemic. And they actually did probably the best coverage of COVID. I don't have all of that. I'm going to show a clip of Dr. Scott Gottlieb coming up. And then I'm going to show first Dr. Anthony Fauci, Dr. Scott Gottlieb, and then the debate between Governor Asa Hutchinson and Mayor Bill de Blasio about vaccine mandates. But also, Anthony Fauci and Scott Gottlieb are talking about what we know about the Omicron variant, because remember when I put that in the title of the show 2 weeks ago on Monday, when it had just been Omicron was just identified over that weekend 2 weeks ago. They said we would know a lot more in 2 weeks. Well, here we are 2 weeks later. Let's see what we know, according to Anthony. Well, I won't criticize the clip. I'll show Dr. Anthony Fauci talking about it, and then I'll talk about what I gleaned from what he's saying and what Scott Gottlieb's saying in the next clip. But let's watch the first clip together first over here.
Thanks for joining us. Again, you were last on just after Thanksgiving. Omicron was just in one state then, at least 25 right now. What have we learned about the variant in the last 2 weeks?
Well, we've learned a lot, and we're continuing to learn it on a daily basis, George. First of all, it clearly has a transmission advantage in the sense of in countries like South Africa and now the UK, where you have it competing with the Delta variant in the sense of ability to transmit. It looks like it has a high degree of transmissibility, and that's the reason why you're seeing literally every day more and more countries, and in the United States, more and more states. The thing that's important is that it appears to be able to evade some of the immune protection of things like monoclonal antibodies, convalescent plasma, and the antibodies that are induced by vaccines. That's the sobering news. The somewhat encouraging news is that preliminary data show that when you get a booster, for example, a third shot of an mRNA, it raises the level of protection high enough that it then does do well against the Omicron, which is, again, another reason to encourage people who are not vaccinated to get vaccinated, but particularly those who are vaccinated to get boosted, because that diminution in protection seems to go way back up again. So that's the importance of getting that best and optimal protection you can. The other thing that's important is that we're getting... So go ahead. I'm saying the other thing that's we're getting anecdotal information from, not necessarily confirmed yet, that the level of severity appears to be maybe a bit less than in the Delta, but there are a lot of confounding issues there, George. It may be due to the underlying protection in the community due to prior infections, but these are just preliminary data that we're going to have to just follow carefully to get them confirmed.
You talked about the advantages of the booster. Should we be thinking about 3 shots now?
Sorry, I was having problems listening because Sandy is barking off in the distance there. I don't know if you can hear her. I told you it's like raining really hard outside, so I'll go open the door for Sandy and try to let her out, but she won't go out because it's raining and it's this terrible. So I go, and there's Sandy and Dash are both walking by over there. I don't know if I can get a Dash and Sandy clip, but I'm getting distracted by my live studio audience when I guess the important things to take from that and from this next clip of Dr. Scott Gottlieb, the important facts about Omicron are that it is highly transmissible. It's especially dangerous to people who have natural immunity from prior infection. They don't do well against Omicron. Also, people who have two shots from Pfizer, the unboosted, just like fully vaccinated but unboosted people, also not as effective. The one piece of good news, getting that booster, and I talked about how I got my booster about a month ago, and that was before anyone could get it. I had to sort of like exaggerate my weight maybe I talked about it. I didn't actually lie, and I don't want to go into that again. But anyway, it's really important that people not only get fully vaccinated but also get boosted to be best protected from the Omicron variant, is what Dr. Fauci was saying there. And regarding whether the Omicron variant causes more severe disease or less severe disease, that remains to be seen. There's some anecdotal evidence that it might be less severe, but confounding factors anyway, and that's all pretty much confirmed by what Dr. Scott Gottlieb says to Margaret Brennan on CBS News' Face the Nation in this next clip. And he also talks about, and I talked about this last week, that the focus on the Omicron variant shouldn't make us miss the fact that there's a real Delta wave going on right now in the United States. Omicron is looking like it's causing a lot of problems in Europe, the UK, Germany. You'll see Dr. Scott Gottlieb talk about that. But our case rate and our death rate, I was talking about how when the same day as those tornadoes, over 1,000 people died from COVID that day. That 1,000 people a day, that's like a 9/11 attack every 3 days or whatever. That is, and our case rate is up. And anyway, I'll talk about all that a little more after we watch Dr. Scott Gottlieb talking to Margaret Brennan, and I'll listen to it while I check out what's going on with Sandy and Dash. But I'll talk about it with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
See, certainly here in the Northeast, Delta infections are picking up. In New York, they're going to start requiring masks tomorrow indoors if vaccines aren't required for entry in the first place. Do you think other governors should follow suit and start requiring masks?
Well, look, we've seen the Delta wave course through most parts of this country. Right now, we're at about 36 cases per 100,000 people per day. To put that in perspective, about 6 weeks ago, we were at 20. Germany, which is having a very dense epidemic right now, is about 50 cases per 100,000 people per day. Most of those cases right now are being driven by very dense epidemics in the Great Lakes region and New England. I think in those parts of the country, it is prudent to start taking steps to try to control the spread. There are certain states like New Hampshire and Massachusetts where the healthcare systems are beginning to get pressed. And mask mandates are the easiest thing we can do, sort of collective action that puts some downward pressure on spread. It would be a temporary measure just to try to preserve the healthcare systems at this point. Most of the country is through the Delta wave, and the reason why you're seeing cases go up so much right now is in part driven by the dense epidemics in these very populated states, but also you're seeing some uptick even in the states that have gotten through their Delta wave, in part because people are moving indoors because of the colder weather and the holidays.
So, we looked at the data, and more than 1 in 4 adults is not fully vaccinated. Only 1 in 4 adults has received a booster. Can we blame the unvaccinated for the spread? Is something else driving this?
Well, the unvaccinated are certainly the individuals who are showing up in the healthcare system requiring advanced care. There probably is a reasonable amount of spread even among the vaccinated individuals at this point, particularly people who only have 2 doses of vaccine, probably are getting subclinical or mild infections and are contributing to the spread as well. But if we look at this time last year when we were dealing with a far less transmissible strain, we had about 120,000 hospitalizations. Now with a far more transmissible strain, perhaps a strain that's slightly more virulent, we have 60,000 hospitalizations. Still tragic, but the vaccines are having an impact on reducing hospitalizations and severe disease, which is really the thesis that we held out for these vaccines all along.
Mm-hmm. You were talking about another variant there, Omicron, we've been speaking about in the past few weeks. There's projections in the UK that it will very soon overtake Delta. They're taking some emergency measures there in Europe. Should we expect that wave to come here and overtake Delta as well?
Yeah, look, I think it's an open question. We can't really transfer the experience from one country to another because there's different levels of immunity in different populations, different countries, and also different states as you even move across the United States. The UK does look a lot like the U.S. in terms of having a lot of vaccine-induced immunity and a lot of immunity from prior infection, and also a lot of people who've been boosted and people who've been infected and then subsequently vaccinated, and they appear to have the best immunity against this new variant. What we're seeing in South Africa right now is the potential, the indication that this may be peaking in the hard-hit Gauteng province and Johannesburg and Pretoria. If that's the case, I think modelers are going to have to reassess some of the early estimates on perhaps when this first began. It might have been spreading furtively, and it went unnoticed initially, and we caught the peak of an epidemic or an epidemic that was well underway rather than the very beginning of an epidemic, and that might change some of the impressions about the transmissibility of this virus. The other possibility is that this coursed very quickly through a subset of the population that's excessively vulnerable to it, and we know it hit very hard people with prior Delta infection who are unvaccinated. So it may be that people who just have Delta-induced immunity are excessively vulnerable to this variant. This is going to take some time to figure out if, in fact, it is indeed peaking in Johannesburg. I think that's going to cause us to reflect on some of the modeling we've been doing.
So there you've got your second expert confirming a lot of what Dr. Anthony Fauci said, raising some other questions. And also that additional fact there at the end about that people who have been infected by Delta may be especially not immune to Omicron, and that may be part of its increased spread because the natural immunity from the Delta variant doesn't translate. But anyway, the big takeaway is, if you haven't been vaccinated, get vaccinated. If you haven't gotten your booster, get your booster. That is the thing that will be safest for you and for everyone else. Raising our vaccination rate that is probably our best defense, along with the other mitigation techniques like masking, social distancing. I don't know. I am skeptical are really being practiced in places where they're necessary. I guess where there are COVID spikes, a lot of times people do start practicing that. But the thing is, there's all this travel. There's sort of an uptick after Thanksgiving, and now we've got Christmas and New Year's coming, which a lot of people are apparently tired of all the COVID restrictions. And the thing is, the COVID variants aren't necessarily tired of you yet, I guess, especially if you haven't been vaccinated and boosted, is the upshot, the takeaway of all the different programs I watched, including those two experts there. And regarding vaccine mandates, and that's kind of a misnomer, for like the federal mandate actually is a mandate that workers be either vaccinated or tested weekly. So that's not really a vaccine mandate when you have the testing option. But when Biden first proposed this, when you go back several weeks, maybe a few months, I mentioned, I put it in relation to the Isaac Asimov Foundation trilogy, and they just did the first season of that on Apple TV Plus, which I watched, which I actually thought was pretty good, where it's a question for psychohistorians: do vaccine mandates work? Because psychohistory is the idea in this science fiction book that you can't predict what an individual is going to do, but you can predict what large populations are going to do. And we don't have psychohistory, so at the time I said we can't, it's not a factual question, it's an opinion. But looking back now, months later, as some of these mandates have gone into effect, empirically the answer is yes. Yes, they do work. They did raise vaccination rates. And anyway, Jake Tapper over on CNN State of the Union, he decided to do something new, which I found kind of humorous, to have someone, a Democrat and a Republican, on at the same time to sort of debate each other. And I find that humorous because, I've been watching these Sunday morning news analysis shows since the 1980s, I guess. And they used to do this all the time. They used to have Republicans and Democrats on at the same time, but now they won't appear together. So now it's something new. That's the thing I found amusing. But I think I'm not a big fan of Bill de Blasio, but he has the right side here, which I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that final clip on the COVID topic together over here.
We're going to try something new on State of the Union today, here to debate whether vaccine mandates are the best way to end this pandemic. Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson and New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio. First of all, we should both note that you both agree that the vaccines are safe and effective. You've both gotten them. You've repeatedly urged Americans to go get vaccinated. Where you disagree on whether or not the government should mandate them. So let's start this debate by me asking you, Governor Hutchinson, and then you two can just engage each other. New York City has sweeping mandates for workers and businesses, and it might sound too sweeping for some people, but 71% of residents of New York City are fully vaccinated. Arkansas has no mandates, and only 50% of your residents are fully vaccinated. Does that not show, Governor Hutchinson, the vaccine mandates work?
Well, I don't believe it does. First of all, put it in historical perspective that never in the history of our country has government mandated the private sector to require vaccinations. It's generally been left up to the states and localities, but it has been looked at as an education effort in our school systems. To put this into the businesses does a number of things. One, it hardens resistance. That's what we see in Arkansas, but I think across the country. Secondly, the courts have struck it down. By and large, the president's mandate, these mandates are unconstitutional constitutional overreaches, and the courts are looking at it in that fashion. It's a little bit closer case when it comes to a city because that's the government closest to the people. But if you're looking at a million employees and you get a 90% vaccination rate, you still have 10%, which is 100,000 workers. And whenever the businesses are struggling with workers, our service providers, they're providing for their family, you don't need to add 100,000 to the unemployed list, and that would hurt us in trying to do our recovery, provide the services we need, already struggling, even in the healthcare industry. If you put that mandate in, you're going to lose some healthcare workers as well. So that's the reasons, part of the reasons that we oppose those mandates.
Mayor de Blasio?
Yeah, Governor, look, I want to speak to this, but first I want to just say my heart goes out to the people of Arkansas. I appreciate your leadership as you're dealing with this crisis, and I want you to know the people in New York City are praying for the people of Arkansas right now, that things recover quickly.
Thank you.
To the question here, Governor, look, right now, here's what I fear. Omicron is here. It's all over the country. This variant moves fast. We have to move faster. And I'll tell you what I hear from our business community, that their greatest fear is shutdowns. Their greatest fear is going back to where we were in 2020, to restrictions, to people losing their livelihood. You mentioned unemployment. The greatest threat to employment right now is that the Omicron variant and the cold winter months are going to supercharge COVID and take us backwards. So I'm going to argue to you that mandates work, and it's time. Since I put mandates in place in New York City starting in August, we've seen over 1 million more doses, 71% of our people fully vaccinated. A lot of those people made the decision because the mandate was there, and it was the thing that moved them. And it's keeping people alive. So I do agree with you. We have to take all the factors into account, but we've proven that mandates work. And now we're up against a new enemy with this new variant. We've got to have a strategy to fight back.
Governor?
And if you want to watch that entire debate, there's a link down under sources in the video description to the full CNN State of the Union program, which I don't know if you have to have like a cable subscription or wait a few days, or I haven't clicked on that link in a long time, but I bet you can watch it somehow if you try hard enough. But anyway, I pretty much pre-criticized that clip. I think Bill de Blasio won that argument, even though I'm not the biggest Bill de Blasio fan, and just because the empirical evidence, like I said, when they put the mandates into effect, hard to say if they were going to, one side was arguing that they would make more people get vaccinated. The other side said that they would, like you heard Asa Hutchinson say there, it will, make people less likely to want to. Uh-oh, the cat is coming up on the table. I hope he doesn't knock over the... Dash is still around and is continuing his miraculous recovery, and he's right there, and I'm just hoping he's not going to knock over the camera again. He's right behind the camera. But anyway, like I said, and Sandy's here. There's like, I'm sorry, I don't know if you can hear. What? I don't know if you can hear Sandy whining there, but I'm like in the middle of my own Dash and Sandy clip right now. But I want to move on to the next clip. I think I discussed the COVID clips enough, and these next two clips are on the Build Back Better bill, which the Democrats, they passed the bipartisan infrastructure bill a couple weeks ago, and then they're working on this Democrat vote-only reconciliation bill. Some people call it social infrastructure. It has like a lot of great social safety net programs in there that, universal pre-K. There's supposedly some climate change infrastructure, like electric vehicles. Well, I think some of that was in the infrastructure bill. But anyway, there's a lot of good stuff in the bill. But even though it was paid for, one of the ways they made sure that it was totally paid for was they stopped some of the programs in the first few years. Even though they fund them for 10 years with taxes, they actually only say the program's going to last a few years. And it is a budget gimmick, but the thing is, that's, and the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, found, I think over 10 years it added $250 billion to the deficit, like $25 billion a year, which is, in the federal budget, that's like a rounding error, less than a rounding error. It's like nothing. So even though it technically did add $250 billion to the deficit over 10 years. But then Lindsey Graham, to try to freak out Senator Joe Manchin, who's one of the who's probably the most conservative Democrat and the hardest to convince to vote for this Build Back Better bill, he asked the CBO to recalculate as if the programs that are stopping after a few years went all the way through the program. And you'll see Chris Wallace introduce that and then sort of bring some facts into it and cross-examine Lindsey Graham on it a little bit, but not enough, really. People say that Chris Wallace is a straight news journalist at Fox News, and he definitely does some journalism, but he also carries forward the Fox News Republican narrative a lot of the time. He calls this the true cost of the bill, which is just, it's false, because the thing you have to understand about this CBO estimate is there is, without an additional vote from Congress, there's no way that it will cost this much. It would require a whole additional vote and a whole additional bill. You can't, because it only, in the current Build Back Better bill, which of course doesn't even exist yet, but it passed the House and it's in the Senate and is going to undergo changes. But so the universal pre-K or the child care only lasts 1 year. I can't remember which one it is. I'll get to that when I have Amy Klobuchar sort of giving a response to what Lindsey Graham says. And Chris Wallace does a pretty good job of contrasting it with the Republican tax cut that had some of the same budget gimmicks. But that wasn't paid for. This is paid for. And gimmicks aside, in the Republican tax bill, they had some individual tax cuts that expire in 2025, and so if Congress doesn't extend those tax cuts, then it'll be, it's like a booby-trapped tax increase that Democrats allowed to happen or whatever, but it still requires an additional vote, just like it would require an additional vote, as I was explaining, to extend these programs. And anyway, I've now overly pre-criticized the clip, and I should probably talk about it with you a little more after we watch one of Chris Wallace's final cross-examinations on Fox News Sunday together. Over here.
On Friday, the CBO estimated the true cost of President Biden's social spending bill is not $1.75 trillion as advertised, but a staggering $4.9 trillion. Joining us now, South Carolina's Lindsey Graham, the top Republican on the Senate Budget Committee, who says the bill could be paving a path to socialism. Senator, welcome back.
Thank you.
You commissioned the Congressional Budget Office to project how much Build Back Better will cost over the 10 years, assuming that the programs that are in it, the spending programs that are in it, go on for 10 years and are not, as in the case with child care, just for 1 year. The CBO found, instead of adding $200 billion to the deficit, it will add $3 trillion to the deficit. But Senator, the White House says that's fake, because if the programs are extended, they'll find ways to pay for them.
Well, give me a plan to pay for them then. President Biden said the bill was fully paid for. Vice President Harris said it was paid for. Schumer, Pelosi, Secretary of Treasury Yellen. The CBO says it's not paid for. It's $3 trillion of deficit spending. It's not $1.75 trillion over 10 years, is $4.9 trillion. What does this mean? The House should revote. The vote in the House was based on a fraud. This bill doesn't cost $1.75 trillion. It cost almost $5 trillion. It doesn't add $300 billion to the deficit. It adds $3 trillion. There is not a plan to pay for it. If there is, I missed it. So give it to me. Give it to the American people. Before we vote in the Senate, show me how you pay for this bill. And you know why I wrote a letter to CBO? Because Joe Manchin came to me and he said, I think this bill is full of gimmicks, that these programs won't go away, Lindsey. And if you score them for 10 years, I think the bill will double. Well, it didn't double. It was almost 2.5 times. So I hope that this will be a showstopper for Build Back Better.
But in 2017, President Trump and all Senate Republicans voted for the tax cuts then that added $2 trillion to the economy. And in fact, you talk about budget gimmicks. It used the same budget gimmick there, for instance, saying that individual tax cuts were going to end in 2025. Here's White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki on that.
The plan they proposed and passed into law, the 2017 tax cuts, were $2 trillion, which were not paid for in any way, shape, or form. That didn't seem to upset them at all.
Senator, does she have a point?
Oh, no, not really. I like giving money back to the taxpayer. I don't like spending more money than we did in World War II, and that's what we're doing right now. This bill, Build Back Better, is $5 trillion. It's not 1.75. It will add $3 trillion to the deficit. When they tell you the bill is paid for, they're lying. When Nancy Pelosi brought it to the House with a CBO score of 1.75, it was a lie. When she said it was $300 billion to the deficit, it's a lie.
Respectfully, what Jen Psaki is saying, and a lot of Democrats are saying, is that when President Trump and you
what's that got to do with anything?
Let me just finish. Passed the 2017 Trump tax cut.
Yeah.
That was a lie. It wasn't paid for.
No, what happens is you can't go beyond 10 years in terms of the budget window. We voted knowing that cutting taxes we believe would be good. I never said that cutting taxes. I voted for cutting taxes. I'm against expanding the government. They're telling you it doesn't cost anything, Chris. Well, the CBO says it costs $3 trillion. Joe Manchin, if you're watching, you were right, Joe. You got this right. It is a lie. It's $4.9 trillion, not 1.75. Okay. It's $3 trillion. So Joe Manchin was right. Now, what the hell are you going to do about it? If you say it's going to be paid for, give me the offsets. Do you raise taxes by $3 trillion? Do you cut the government by $3 trillion?
Let's talk about what's in the Build Back Better plan.
So, and then they do talk about what's in the bill, but I think that there was some good cross-examination from Chris Wallace there, but I mentioned one of the talking points that he was supporting there, the whole the true cost is what the bill would cost if a later Congress votes to extend the bill, when they also might find a way to raise taxes to pay for it for that extension. I mean, that's just not honest, and I don't think Chris Wallace made that clear enough that it was going to require this extra legislation, so it's not really the true cost. He also carried started off in his introduction by amplifying Lindsey Graham's talking point about the road to socialism, but never asked the question, well, is there anything in here that where the government buys up and owns the means of production? Not really. That's what socialism is. But anyway, I don't want to go off on the what is socialism thing. But I guess, like I said before I showed the clip, a lot of people are saying Chris Wallace leaving, to go to CNN Plus or whatever. He's one of the last straight news journalists at Fox News, but I don't think he's always been that straight in a journalistic sense. I'm not talking about sexual orientation. People, when I talk about supposedly straight news anchors on Fox News, people would sometimes think I was talking about their sexual orientation, but no, I'm talking about whether they are biased in their news reporting. And I think Chris Wallace didn't do the greatest job there, and he did support some Republican talking points, but he did, do some cross-examination and bring up the Republican tax cut, which wasn't paid for at all. They didn't even... anyway, I don't want to go into the whole Republican tax cut, but I do want to contrast the cross-examination of Chris Wallace with what Amy Klobuchar says, and does get cross-examined by Jake Tapper with some of the same, Jake Tapper cross-examines Amy Klobuchar, Democratic senator, with this new CBO score, but she, I think, does a good job of batting it away because of the facts I already explained to you. And then if you're worried that Lindsey Graham is going to use his new CBO score to get Senator Joe Manchin not to vote for Build Back Better, well, Amy Klobuchar has some comforting words about that in The second clip on the Build Back Better topic I will show and talk with you about after we watch together over here.
Get it done.
So Republicans asked the Congressional Budget Office to analyze the Build Back Better bill if key provisions such as the child tax credit or universal pre-K were made permanent instead of being phased out after a few years. Under that set of circumstances, the CBO found that it would potentially add $3 trillion to the deficit. Now, I understand Democrats are pushing back on that because the bill, as written, does not make those programs permanent. But don't you ultimately want those programs to be permanent?
Facts matter here, Jake. And the point is what you just made, is that this bill is paid for. It's paid for by taxing the wealthiest. And it's paid for to help regular people.
But you want
and
those.
All the economists have said that it doesn't make it, it's not inflationary because of the fact it's paid for. Now, one of the reasons you like to have programs be for shorter time sometimes, you want to make sure they're working. You want to think what's worked. We know, I think, that pre-K is going to be a major part of this, that it is going to be something that we should keep in place. So what do? You can continue a lot of the tax changes we've made to pay for it. There's other tax changes out there that we haven't even touched, like, for instance, bringing up the corporate tax rate to where it was before the Trump presidency. Every point you bring it up, if you brought it up to, say, 25%, that's $400 billion. That's still on the table. Why do I bring that up? Is that there are still ways to pay for things going forward. But right now, with this bill, it is paid for and it is not inflationary. To the contrary, it's going to help us with the inflation issue.
Right. So the CBO report did seem designed to get Joe Manchin to not support the bill, right? I mean, that's kind of...
Clearly, this was why the Republicans asked for this. But Joe Manchin is someone, he gets our country. He gets the plight of so many people in West Virginia and how they've been having to pay more for prescription drug prices. He's been actually a strong proponent of taking on pharma to bring down prescription drug
Have you
prices.
talked to him? Is he on board yet? Because he has not committed to this bill, and you need him. You can't pass it without him.
The obvious.
Right.
And those negotiations are continuing, as they are on voting rights, something else very important. He is behind the bill that I'm leading, the Freedom to Vote Act. Many people have been working on this, from Senator Schumer to Tim Kaine, to Senator Warnock and Padilla and John Tester. It's an incredible effort. Every single Democrat supporting that bill, and we just got to find a way to get it on the floor for a vote.
You grilled the head of Instagram this week over his app's impact.
So, I thought that if you compare what Amy Klobuchar said about the new CBO score that the Republicans got versus what Lindsey Graham said, the one that I think is more reality-based is Amy Klobuchar. You can argue the opposite if you have different partisan leanings and some facts to back up your analysis in the comment section. But I also appreciate that Senator Klobuchar there talked about voting rights and having the support of Joe Manchin to pass some voting rights legislation, which is going to require some sort of carve out in the filibuster. Hopefully that's something that can still happen before some of the problems with our democracy get worse and worse. You know, I talked about while democracy is dying is the final topic I want to discuss with you briefly with this final newsmaker clip. This is Senator Roger Marshall from Kansas being asked a variety of different ways by Chuck Todd on NBC News' Meet the Press as to whether he accepts the outcome of the 2020 election. He sort of starts obtusely with this Bob Dole reference, since Bob Dole recently died and was a senator from Kansas, but then he becomes more and more insistent, asks it 3 different ways, never really gets he gets this. I guess Roger Marshall has decided, like a whole bunch of Republicans, that they just need to talk about election integrity and states following their own laws and constitution without ever answering the question about did Joe Biden win the election fair and square, which of course he did, talking about being reality based. And then Chuck Todd, to his credit, at least brings up something that didn't come up with, should have been a bigger story, was not covered as well as it should have been on the Sunday shows, this PowerPoint for the coup that broke in the last couple days. And I don't know if you read it, but it's ridiculous, but also kind of dangerous. And there are dangerous things going on in our voting rights in terms of partisan people who are Trump loyal, who are being put in positions of power to make sure that the votes, that whole like coup PowerPoint couldn't work because people like at the state level, the Secretary of State in Georgia, responsible for the elections, Brad Raffensperger, wouldn't find the 18,000 votes or whatever that Trump asked him to find so that he could win instead of Biden. And there were similar people like Governor Ducey in Arizona, also someone who I disagree with on a lot of things, wouldn't he famously like wouldn't answer Trump's phone call when he was like certifying the votes. And well, like Trump is trying to make sure that there are a lot more loyal Trump people to next time in 2024 to certify him the winner whether he wins or not. And that was all part of this coup PowerPoint that Roger Marshall, he's got like no answers, but Chuck Todd has a few questions at least in this final newsmaker clip, and then I'm going to show Chris Wallace's final sign-off. But here's the final newsmaker clip for the program today over here.
From the federal government. You brought up Bob Dole at the beginning. We're going to have our own sort of tribute to him later in the show. But I'm curious of this, Senator. Bob Dole conceded the election in 1996. The last president has not. What could the former president learn from Bob Dole? Well, listen, I think that this is an issue of election integrity, and I think that's what's really important to Americans across the nation. We value the ballot and the ballot booth. We want election integrity. There's a lot of controversy out there, and I'm focused right now on making it easier to vote and harder to cheat. I think that's the focus right now. Well, I want to actually, Bob Dole, one of the last interviews he gave was in July to USA Today. He actually was asked about the former president, and he said this: he lost the election, and I regret that he did, but they did. He had Rudy Giuliani running all over the country claiming fraud. He never had one bit of fraud in all those lawsuits he filed and statements he made. I'm a Trumper. I'm sort of trumped out, though. Do you know, you voted, you stood with those that didn't want to certify the election. Do you regret that now, considering all the crazy cockamamie things that Mark Meadows and others were doing? Look, I'm always going to stand up for election integrity. I want to make sure that every state obeys their own laws and obeys their own constitution, especially in a time of crisis. So that's what's at risk for me right now, is maintaining the integrity of that election. And I want to do everything I can going forward to make sure that those elections have even more safety valves in it, that there's higher levels of integrity. Americans value the sanctity of that ballot booth. Do you believe you were elected fair and square in 2020? You know, absolutely I do. I think Kansas has some of the tightest election laws in the land. We went back and looked at that to make sure that it was a safe and fair election. So proud of our Secretary of State, so proud of our county clerks and those people that volunteer checking the IDs to make sure that every person got one vote. We're just really proud of how Kansas could do it. Other states could look and see how Kansas does it. And do you believe that Joe Biden was elected fair and square? You know, Joe Biden was sworn into office. I called him Mr. President since the day he was sworn in. I still remain concerned about election integrity. I think that we need to go back and look at what did the states obey their own laws? Did they obey their own constitution? The New York Times says a bunch of senators were briefed on this supposed PowerPoint and other ideas that the former White House chief of staff was circulating. Were you briefed by some of these things before January 6th, some of these arguments about the Chinese controlling 28 states and things like that? You know, not at all. I never have heard that story. I don't know if there's any truth to that at all. No, I haven't. All right. Senator Roger Marshall, Republican from Kansas.
He does, like I said, not many answers there from Senator Roger Marshall. A lot of evasions about election integrity, etc., but I mean, at least kudos to Chuck Todd for bringing up the coup PowerPoint, though he didn't really go into detail. And I don't know, I think those should have been bigger stories, along with some of the, well, maybe when the January 6th committee starts having some live hearings and some of the more of this information comes out publicly, that rather than just like these leaks or book excerpts or other things that have been coming out. But anyway, that is the final newsmaker clip. The last, I didn't want to end the program while I have my bonus Dash and Sandy or Dandy clip for the Dash and Sandy fans out there. Oh, and I saw another super chat contribution from Lulu Girl. Glad to hear that Dash is feeling better, and you'll see that in the Dash and Sandy clip. But before I finish, I did want to show Chris Wallace's final sign-off on Fox News Sunday, which apparently was a surprise to like even the people he worked with in the DC bureau of Fox News. And usually they like, when they tell you they're leaving, they are leaving in like a month or a week, or like Brian Williams when he left MSNBC recently. I don't know if there's some story behind that. He's like had to get out quickly, or I know he had a contract that expired, a 4-year contract that expired at the end of the year. So, but I think there's more backstory to it. The thing is, I kind of did my criticism of whether he was a straight news journalist on Fox News. He says some things that, no one at Fox News told him what guest to book or what question to ask, but that doesn't really address what I'm talking about in terms of supporting the right-wing Republican talking points on the show a lot, even though he would sometimes question them in his cross-examination of guests, but he still supported the right-wing narrative a lot of the time. But anyway, let's all say goodbye to Chris Wallace for the last time on Fox News Sunday. Over here.
A personal note. After 18 years, this is my final Fox News Sunday. It is the last time, and I say this with real sadness, we will meet like this. 18 years ago, the bosses here at Fox promised me they would never interfere with a guest I booked or a question I asked, and they kept that promise. I have been free to report to the best of my ability, to cover the stories I think are important, to hold our country's leaders to account. It's been a great ride. We've covered 5 presidential elections, interviewed every president since George H.W. Bush, traveled the world sitting down with France's Emmanuel Macron and Russia's Vladimir Putin. And I've gotten to spend Sunday mornings with you. It may sound corny, but I feel we've built a community here. There's a lot you can do on Sunday mornings. The fact you've chosen to spend this hour with us is something I cherish. But after 18 years, I have decided to leave Fox. I want to try something new, to go beyond politics to all the things I'm interested in. I'm ready for a new adventure, and I hope you'll check it out. And so, for the last time, dear friends, that's it for today. Have a great week, and I hope you'll keep watching Fox News Sunday.
So yeah, that was it. Goodbye, Chris Wallace. I don't know who they're going to get in there. I've been watching Chris Wallace host Fox News Sunday all 18 years. I've been watching the whole, when did they start? In like 95 with Tony Snow. I actually had a little email communication with Tony Snow way back in the beginning days. And then he was at, I can't remember, like he went and he was like the press secretary for Bush, and then he died of cancer. And I can't remember, was he the Fox News Sunday host? Yeah, he left to be the press secretary for Bush, and that's when 18 years ago, that was that 2003. That's when Chris Wallace came in, and I don't know. I've talked a lot about what I think about Chris Wallace. I don't know who's going to come in now. Who else is like a straight news anchor that's really, maybe Brett Baer is the closest they have, and even he, I also think that he's not a total straight news journalist, but he's the closest they have. And then if they bring him in, who's going to do special report? Or I don't know. I hope it's not like Trace Gallagher. He was awful when he was in. Anyway, apparently they're going to have some rotating hosts. And anyway, I got to finish up, but I did promise a bonus Dash and Sandy or Dandy clip for the fans out there. And I wanted to especially thank the Super Chat contributors. Let me show that little screenshot here I was talking about earlier. So thanks again, Matthew, K-Tiff, and Double Lulu Girl, and Sandy's over there right now. And this is was this Saturday morning or Sunday? I think this was Saturday morning. Feeding time. I fed Dash and Sandy. Was it Saturday? It might have been Sunday morning. I can't remember. Either yesterday morning. Well, I should be able. That's something I should be able to tell from the clip itself, right? Or is it? Do you even care? Does anybody care? Whatever, doesn't matter. This is feeding time, and you get to hear Sandy bark. Although, didn't you already hear Sandy bark? And I feed Sandy. Won't eat the dry kibble by itself. Sandy the dog. So we have to mix in. This is like some sort of like doggy stew. We mix in with the dry kibble, and then I give a little piece of the dry kibble to Dash at the end. So you get to see Dash eat a piece of dry dog food, which he loves, even though he's a cat for some reason. And you get to see Sandy bark in the final clip today over here. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed the Dash and Sandy clip at the end. I hope you enjoyed all the other clips I picked out for you. I will be back next Monday and every Monday for a while. I haven't quite decided. I didn't get jury duty today. I got to check that after 5. But I actually have a meeting in a Zoom meeting in 3 minutes, so I got to sign off. Thank you all for joining me. I'll see you next Monday. Until then, I guess I'll be seeing all of you around the internet.